You're listening to the Red Eye Hour.
Welcome back, everybody. This is your host, J.Meeks, and you are at the Red Eye Hour. Thanks, everybody, for coming back. We have a new solo stories. Today is Solo Stories, Part 7, the Hayswood Hospital. This particular story, I'm going to give you some history and some background, and then I have a story tied to the Hayeswood Hospital. So this is an abandoned hospital located in Maysville, Kentucky. It dates back to the late 1890s to like the 1915s. It was originally a private school for girls, and it was named the Hayswood Seminary. Now, reports that I found, sometime between 1907 and 1923, it was bought by a Mrs. Mary Pearl Wilson, and she gifted it to the city of Maysville to be used as a hospital. So the original structure that was built was torn down, and then a new structure was built, and in 1923 it became the Hayswood Hospital. Now, this hospital actually has an address of 2nd 98th West 4th Street in Maysville, Kentucky. And the street is a pretty good incline. So if you can imagine standing in the street and the street's kind of inclined and you're standing there, and then you have the hospital that's leveled there on the ground. And it's like a 4-story structure. There's a basement, then 3 upper floors. Like 3 or 4 big pillars in the front for design to make it look nice. Pretty big hospital for that size of a town. The front had like a half crescent moon parking. That was the shape of it, if I had to give it a shape. And there's also like a side spots on the side of the hospital, and also in the back there was parking in the back of the hospital. So in 1931, the opening of the Simon Kitten Bridge in Maysville was constructed and done. And with this bridge being built, it opened up a lot of opportunities for the residents that lived in that area. With this, the hospital was able to treat a large portion of southwestern Ohio residents. So during its glory years, when the hospital was running good and they had financing was great and they were seeing a large population of people, they actually won a few care awards over the years also for being a good hospital. The U.S. government and the U.S. Navy also came in, and they used the Hayswood Hospital after the Pearl Harbor attacks in 1941, and patients and clients were sent to this hospital and were treated for being psychologically traumatized. Over the years, the hospital started to struggle, since it was considered a rural area, and the small city hospital just couldn't keep up with the rapidly changing world of healthcare. This next piece of information, I couldn't find a date no matter where I looked, but there was reported that there was a random earthquake near Maysville, Kentucky, and this actually caused some significant structural damage to the hospital and the physical plant area that was in the basement of the hospital, and this kind of added to the burden of already what was going on with them falling behind with technology, and because of bigger hospitals being built other places, and with more specialized doctors and more options, people start going to these places later in the years. So in 1971, they did a little bit of building onto the hospital, and now it could hold like 87 patients. In the early 80s, it was sold to a larger corporation that owned other hospitals, but that was just a matter of time, and eventually on February 9th of 1983, it was shut down for good because there was a Meadowview Medical Center built to the southern part of Maysville, Kentucky, and it just kind of ran them out of business. So this hospital had seen many things during its active years. It had regular medical floors for patients, a small ER department, a maternity ward, part of the hospital they used by the U.S. Navy, and like any hospital, there were many births and there were many deaths that happened over the years at the Hayswood Hospital. So some general activity that's reported by the residents of Maysville and people who have explored this abandoned building over the years report seeing like lights in rooms at night, or glowing lights from different floors of the hospital, reports of shadow people in the windows and in the hallways, and apparitions. People have reported hearing crying babies, disembodied voices, and moans of suffering patients. One of the most interesting reports is people and ghost hunters have reported this entity of a woman, and the urban myth is a woman died giving birth and the baby died. Also another version that says the woman died but the baby lived, and she wanders the halls looking for her baby. And the other story, the first one, is that they witnessed this woman walking around in the maternity ward holding her dead baby, an apparition of this that they see. People have reported that some staff at the hospital, when it was up and running, from administration, nurses, doctors, and even a janitor that supposedly worked at the Hayswood Hospital their whole career and literally dedicated their lives to this hospital, that they have been known to roam the halls. And people have seen apparitions of doctors or like administration type personnel. And there's reports of seeing doctors and nurses and other staff on certain floors of the hospitals, in the stairs, in the offices, in the elevators. There's even one report of a patient that reported seeing the apparition of two nurses in his room, and then they faded away. And this was before the hospital closed. This is when he was a patient at the hospital. So that's a pretty crazy one. So present day, it's really fenced off. They have windows boarded up. They've built like structures in front of different entrances of the hospital, really trying to keep people out because it's overgrown with like ivy and moss, and the bushes are overgrown and the trees are overgrown, and there's busted out windows and some windows that are still open on the higher floors, and inside is pretty bad. Like there's graffiti literally everywhere. The walls and ceilings are rotting and hanging down. There's standing water in a lot of places. It's pretty rough. Lots of asbestos, lots of lead paint, things like that. But the story I'm about to tell happened probably over a decade ago, before they really put up all these fenced down areas and blocked everything off. And this is a story about a group of friends that decide to go to the Hayswood Hospital, and they're going to explore the abandoned building, and then they're going to spend the night, and their plan is to sleep on the roof. And they wanted to sleep on the roof because, like I told you in the beginning of the story, it sits on a pretty good incline of a street, and so the hospital sits up pretty high, and it overlooks the city of Maysville, and also you can see the Ohio River. So that's why they wanted to sleep up there, because of the view as well. So this group of friends, Jack, Ronnie, Luke, and Brian, they went to the Hazelwood Hospital, and they got there still when it was daylight out, and they kind of used this opportunity to scope out the place and, kind of make their game plan of what they were going to do. And like I said, they decided on that section over the roof overlooking the Ohio River. So after they had stowed all their supplies out of sight, because you never know who's wandering around, they started making their way down through the building, and they wanted to start at the basement. But when they got to the basement, there was quite a bit of standing water down there, and it looked pretty stagnant and pretty nasty. So they were like, maybe we won't explore this part. They could go down a little bit into the basement, which they did, and all they could hear was like water dripping and sounded like maybe like moans from the pipes and maybe a far off scraping metal sound, but nothing really out of the ordinary. So as they're making their way to the first floor, Jack, one of the boys, he heard a sound that made him jump quite a bit, and it was something like a scraping of metal followed by a sharp snap. And all the boys looked at each other and they heard it, but they just kind of thought to themselves, well, guess something old in the building finally gave in and just broke. That's probably what it was. So as they're exploring the floors, of course, there's endless hallways, and there's still like a lot of equipment left over. There's still phones on the nurses' desks, the call lights. Some of them are hanging out of the wall and hanging down from just the building collapsing and rotting. There's still hospital beds in some of the rooms and some of the surgery wings. There's the big lights that they used. On the children's floor, there were still cribs and like beds for toddlers. Some of it, you could tell like the walls were painted like red, and there was like a Spider-Man in the corner, and there was like Sesame Street characters on another wall, but the paint had been chipped, and worn out and mold growing on it and, looked pretty bad. So as they're exploring the different floors, going down the hallways, Jack would often hear this light scraping sound. But when he asked his friends if they heard anything, the answer was always a resounding, no, man, we didn't hear anything. And the creepy old building was just making him paranoid, and he decided, it's just making me paranoid, I just need to chill out. And they continued through the building. Upon reaching the 3rd floor, they came across an elevator shaft. And these doors were firmly closed, but they decided they got a couple guys on each side, and they were actually able to pry it open. And as soon as they pulled the squeaking doors apart, like this rush of stagnant air came out, and they all stepped back and kind of like, oh man, whoa, that's kind of nasty. So they take their flashlights and they're kind of flashing them up into the shaft of the elevator and down, but one of the boys decides to, and this was Luke, he decided he wanted to get a better look, so he peered in and looked a little more, but Jack was like, hey man, I actually want to go down onto the elevator. And they're all like, I don't know if that's a good idea, man. So he looks up with his flashlight into the elevator shaft and sees cobwebs and spiders and old cables and wires, and he looks down and sees the elevator shaft is actually down a ways, but he can see the top of it. So Jack gets in and he slides down the cables onto the elevator, and he looked around for the hatch of the elevator, and it was under some fallen debris, so he moves that out of the way and sweeps it out, and the hinges were horribly rusty, but he was able to open it, but it did take some force for sure. So once he gets the hatch open and he's looking inside the elevator, and it's just dirty and there's not really much to see, and all of a sudden Jack hears this loud bang in the elevator shaft, and it startled him, and he thought, oh man, I don't want this elevator to plummet down to the basement. So he gets worried and starts climbing back up the cables. So the rest of the boys were calling out to Jack, come on man, get up here, we don't know what that was. And they're extending their hands out, and he grabs them and they pull him up and they get him onto the floor. And as soon as they pulled him up and he was still sitting on the floor and his friends are kind of standing beside him, they hear the metallic scraping sound echoed in the elevator shaft. And then all of a sudden, it went back to dead silence. So they gathered themselves and they kept moving. So at this point, it's already past 10 p.m. And so the boys made their way to the roof and went up the stairs and got out the main door. And up there, there's big AC units and, filtered air compressions coming out and air filter vents coming out from the laundry and from the pipes and all the different things you'd see on a roof of a big, large structure like a hospital. So as they were getting their stuff set up, they noticed a car had pulled up out front, and it was a car full of girls, probably from their high school. And the boys decided, let's mess with them just a little bit. Let's not scare them too bad, but let's scare them. Let's have some fun with them. So they kind of snuck back down the stairs, and they're rolling debris and rocks down the stairs, and they're slowly closing doors. And every noise that the girls heard, they'd start to get freaked out and scream a little bit and, freak themselves out. So they wanted to give him one last big scare. So Ronnie, one of the guys in the group, he kind of lets out this guttural, tasty morsel voice as one of the others stomped his feet down the first couple steps. And of course, this drew a shriek from the girls, and they all ran and fled the hospital and got in their car and drove off. And the boys just sat around got a pretty good laugh out of it, because what they did really wasn't even that scary. It was kind of corny, but it worked, and it was hilarious. So some time goes by, they're back on the roof, they're talking, just having guy talk, and slowly one by one they start to fall asleep. So this next part is where the end of the story takes a twist. So this next part I'm going to read is almost like a journal entry, or someone typed up themselves that had this personal experience of this story at the Hayswood Hospital, and I'm going to read that as this person wrote it. At about 2 a.m., I could hear sounds coming down in the hospital again. My friends had all fallen asleep at this point, and I myself wasn't able to get comfortable enough, and I don't know what possessed me to do this, but I grabbed my flashlight to go and investigate the noise, just in case it was another group of people. By the time I'd gotten to the bottom of the stairs from the roof, I could hear that scraping, metallic sound again, but this time it was a little different. I couldn't really tell which direction it was coming from. It seemed as though it was like everywhere, all around me. And my breathing became heavier and heavier. All around me, there was just this terrible metallic scraping sound going on. And then I saw it. Standing down at the end of the hallway, tattered clothing, pale skin, and an almost forlorn expression. At first, it slowly slumped toward me, dragging its feet as it went, moving in awkward positions. But it started gaining speed. And before long, it was running straight at me, and it let out this cry that sounded like a mixture between the metal scraping sounds and almost like this demon dog just roar that came out of it. I turned tail and ran like hell back up the stairs to wake my friends up. We needed to get out of this awful place. I slammed the rooftop door behind me and I shouted as loud as I could to everyone else, "Guys, wake up! We have to leave now! There's something here!" And one of my friends woke up looking confused. "What? What happened, man? What are you talking about?" "I was just chased downstairs. We need to get the fuck out of here." And then the door opened to the roof, and I looked back towards the door as it walked down into view for everyone to see. And I'm not proud of what I did next, but I jumped from the roof to a nearby tree towards the back of the building and quickly made my way to the front and got in my car. I waited about 30 minutes and I tried calling my friends over and over and over again, but no one ever showed up and no one ever answered when I called. I know, I'm a coward. I hate myself for it. A couple weeks later, they were all found by other people exploring the hospital, down inside the basement, waterlogged with large chunks missing out of them. Over the last 7 years since then, the memory started to recede, and I was starting to think I could get back to normality. But you see, I started hearing it again. The metallic scraping sound. It's just a matter of time. I shouldn't have abandoned you guys. And that is the end of Solo Stories Part 7, the Hayswood Hospital. I hope you guys really liked it. It was an interesting story. Let me know what you think. Hit the like button. Subscribe if you haven't. Engage with us. And glad you guys came back to listen to the story. Happy spooky season and happy Halloween. And we'll talk to you guys soon. Goodbye.
Thanks for flying with the Red Eye Hour.